Let's go ahead and get started. My topic today is everyone is struggling. I was thinking about this recently because you know, you think to yourself, or I don't know, I think to myself, boy, my life seems to be really hard lately. I seem to be just like a hamster on that hamster wheel, just doing a lot of running and not getting anywhere. And, I'm looking on social media and I see these other people and it seems like their lives are doing so well. But then I started paying attention to the people around me who would share what was really going on in their lives. And I was surprised that I am not the only person struggling. In fact, I have not met a person who is not struggling in some kind of way. Um, so that's kind of where this topic started, is when I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the people who have shared things with me. Um, a coworker whose 7-year-old son has leukemia. Um, I have a coworker who is trans and transitioned in her 50s and is now going through a divorce. I have a coworker whose son died of suicide, coworkers who are struggling in their marriages, coworkers who are suffering with depression, coworkers who are suffering with substance use, mental health disorders, panic attacks. There's just so many things right now, and it just feels like anyone who really shares with you what's going on in their life, there's so few people that are like, everything's great with me right now, I'm doing fine, I feel so successful and wonderful right now. So it led me to the conclusion that I believe most people are struggling right now, if not all people are going through some kind of difficulty. So why is that? Why does it seem like everything is so hard lately? And so I came up with a few theories as to why that might be. Well, for one thing, the speed of the world has gotten faster. Um, I watched a documentary on Netflix several weeks ago. Um, and they were talking about how email changed the course of the workplace, because it used to be that if you wanted to communicate to somebody, you had to, send something through the mail. If you wanted to do it really fast, you could send a fax, but things moved slower in those times. And then when email was invented, you could send something instantly. I can send an email to a coworker who is in the cubicle next to me and they'll get it instantly. And I don't even have to get up from my desk and walk over there and have a conversation with them. And they were saying that the expectation of productivity in the workplace increased dramatically when email was invented, because we can get information so quickly. And so the expectation of how much productivity we need to have in our workplace just skyrocketed. So workplace productivity has gone up significantly, and life is much more complex than it used to be. So another theory of mine is the gap between the rich and the poor is getting larger. And this is something that I'm sure you've heard about. They talk about it in economics. The middle class is getting smaller. The richer class and the poorer class are getting, the richer are getting richer and the poorer are getting poorer. And even the middle class is under the crunch of economic stress. We are all much closer to homelessness than we are to being millionaires. We talk about the American dream, like anyone can be a millionaire, right? You just work hard and, I don't know, do American things, and then you can become a millionaire. But really, in reality, we are all much closer to homelessness than we are to being millionaires. One economic disaster, you get cancer or you get in a car accident or you become disabled, and that's it for you. We are all on the verge of economic collapse. Many of us, most of us, the average personal debt for Americans is $101,915. So that's average. That seems high to me, but that is how far in debt we are as an American society. Then COVID-19. COVID-19, when we're talking about trauma, COVID-19, it was a trauma. It was a trauma for everybody in the world. For some people, it was more of a trauma than for other people. So COVID caused death on a wide scale. It caused long-term sickness also on a wide scale. Do any of you know someone who experienced long COVID? And I can't see all of you, but I know some people, young people, who experienced long COVID. They and are still experiencing long COVID. They are experiencing probably what will be lifelong repercussions from having COVID. COVID also shined a light on those that the American economy considers disposable, such as the elderly, people who are disabled, and minorities, who were the communities who were impacted the most by COVID. And it was like, well, it's okay if we don't wear a mask because, you know, it's only the disabled people it's only the elderly people who are dying from this, so it's fine. Well, since when did the elderly and the disabled people not count as people that deserve to be protected in our society? COVID caused a lot of fear, caused a huge amount of economic stress. Lots of people lost their jobs, lots of people lost their businesses. And it was trauma for everyone. And I, as a parent of teens, I added trauma for everyone, but especially kids. I have 4 kids in middle high school right now, and those kids experienced intense trauma during the time of COVID, especially when we were in lockdown during that year and they were doing the virtual schooling. That was really awful for them. And if you talk to any teachers, they will tell you that students are more unruly, more difficult to deal with now than they were before COVID because they have experienced this trauma. And our school system is so focused on getting their academics up to standard that they're not really focusing on how to help these kids work through the trauma that they experienced. So then my next theory is that the world in general has just gotten more complicated than it used to be. So our health insurance, anyone who has tried to deal with health insurance problems knows that our health insurance system is like unbelievably complicated. It has gotten way out of control in terms of how difficult it is to navigate. Social media has made our world way more complicated, and there have been multiple documentaries made on this subject, multiple essays written on it. I don't need to get too far into it, but social media has changed our world significantly and probably not for the better. Parenting has gotten more complicated. Work has gotten more complicated. Politics has gotten more complicated. Everything is more complicated than it used to be. And since we were mentioning politics, let's talk about our current political climate. Our current political climate is not great. It's definitely not how it used to be. I'm not saying politics has ever been rosy and beautiful and cooperative, but it seems like it's just getting worse and worse, more and more difficult to navigate. And so I came up with some ideas about why this political climate seems to be so difficult right now. There's a lot of anger. If you talk to people on any side of any type of political divide, that you will find anger. They are angry. I am angry often at politics. There's accusations on both sides, no nuance allowed in discussions without being accused of betraying your own side. Both sides cancel one another, right? We've talked about cancel culture a lot, and there's a lot of disagreement on whether or not it's okay. But the problem I have with cancel culture is that there's no room for growth, no room for change. When people make mistakes, there's no room for understanding that you've made a mistake and changing who you are, for growing or learning. And then if you change your mind, you are punished by both sides. I remember a couple years ago, there were some Trump supporters who had voted for Trump in the first election that he won against Hillary. And then those people came to realize that maybe that vote wasn't very good. Maybe they shouldn't have voted for him, and maybe he was not doing good for the country after all. And so they changed their mind, and they sort of announced that they had changed their mind. They were, of course, immediately rejected by the Trump supporting side, but the other side also rejected them. The other side said, well, you voted for Trump, so screw you. I don't care what you think. And I thought, how can we be doing that? How can we tell people we want you to think like us, and then when they start thinking like us, we reject them because sometime in the past they made a mistake that they now regret? That doesn't make sense to me. That this kind of political divide, it's just hurting all of us. Both sides are getting more extreme than they used to be. And that, I believe, is largely also due to social media. Social media has hugely influenced the political divide. Nobody knows where to get their information from. This is another huge problem. I often have conversations with my dad. My dad is on a different side of the political aisle than I am. And we try to have reasonable discussions with each other about this because we love each other, we care about each other, and we respect each other's opinion. So how can we then be on opposite sides of political divide? So we talk to each other, and part of the problem that we often have in our discussions is that where he gets his information from is a source that I don't trust, and where I get my information from is a source that he doesn't trust. And so it's difficult for us to even have a conversation when we can't even agree on what is fact and what is not fact. A climate of suspicion, a lack of trust, and it is splitting families, communities, churches, neighbors, states, and the country. So the political climate, really toxic, really difficult to navigate nowadays. And then, I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like I have a tendency to take on more than I can handle. I always think, oh, I'll be able to handle that. I'll be able to deal with it in the moment. We take on extracurricular activities, hobbies, church responsibilities, more pets than we can handle, kids, etc. So we just seem to be taking on things and then have more and more stress. And then trauma from our relationships. So we have parents who disagree with their own children about how to raise the grandkids. Families get divided by politics. Families get divided by religion. And sometimes there's no room for love and relationship when there's this divide, right? People who are on opposite side of politics, it's like your values are so different than mine that I can't even be in a relationship with you. And so it's splitting families, it's splitting people up. And there's no ability for discussions on these topics that we can both listen to and understand one another's perspectives. Because listening to and understanding the perspective of someone on the other side feels like betraying your own side. That's the kind of climate that we have created, that we can't even try to listen to and understand what someone else is saying when they disagree with us on any topic. So we talk about stress, but let's talk about trauma. And this is the part that I love talking about because this is what I do for my job. I am a trainer and I train on topics of trauma. So I love talking about trauma. It's one of my favorite topics to kind of educate people about. So when we are under stress, our bodies respond by going into the fight-flight response. You probably heard of the fight-flight response before. And we've added a few. There's fight, flight, and freeze, and then there's like fawn, and there's a couple other ones. But we'll just call it the fight-flight response for simplicity. Our bodies are not great at distinguishing between different types of threats, right? So, back in whatever olden days, your fight-flight response might have been activated when you would be physically attacked, right? But we're not as often physically attacked anymore. And so our bodies tend to go into the fight-flight response when we're doing something that we find to be stressful, like going to the dentist, right? So my fight-flight response might be useful to me if I'm being attacked by a tiger, but it will be less useful to me if I'm having a fight with my boss, right? So how does the fight-flight response change our body? Well, it does lots of things. It changes our body in a number of ways that's designed to help us if we need to run away for our lives or if we need to fight for our lives, which again, not super useful when we're like having a relational difficulty. So our blood pressure rises, our heart rate rises, our muscle tension increases, our digestion is suppressed, our reproductive system is suppressed, our immune system is suppressed. There's a bunch of ways that our body changes when we go into the fight flight response. So one of the things that trauma does is it will put us into our fight flight state, and then sometimes we get stuck there. We get stuck in the fight flight state. So our bodies were designed to go into the fight flight state for a few minutes, and then the danger's over and you go out of the fight flight state back into a state of balance. That's what we're supposed to be in all the time, this state of balance. But the amount of stress that we hold on our shoulders all the time in our modern world puts us into our fight flight response, and then we stay in that fight flight response, and we're not supposed to be staying there. That's not where we're supposed to live. We're supposed to live in a state of balance, but instead we're in fight flight all the time. So the stress response, so here are some of this diagram will show you some of the things that you might have when you go into your fight flight response. So let's use a couple of examples, right? If my body goes into a fight flight state and my muscles tense so that I can run away from danger or fight off an attacker, that's fine for a few minutes, right? But what if I go into a fight flight state and my muscles tense and they stay tensed for a month? What's going to happen? What's going to happen is I'm going to get knots in my muscles. My muscles are going to get fatigued. I'm going to have back problems and neck problems and jaw problems, right? Because my muscles are tensed and they're not supposed to stay tensed all the time, right? So your body prioritizes your energy use when you're in fight flight. So one of the things it does is it suppresses your digestive system, because your body thinks, if I'm being attacked by somebody, then digestion isn't going to be something that keeps me alive, right? So if my digestion is suppressed for a few minutes, that's okay, right? But if my digestion is suppressed for a year, what's that going to do to me? Well, it causes digestion problems, right? I have trouble with food. I have ulcers. I develop problems with my whatever digestive system. And so a lot of the problems, a lot of the stomach issues that we have are a result of stress. We have higher blood pressure. And so when we have higher blood pressure for a long time, that we get in trouble. Our heart beats faster. When our heart beats faster all the time, that does something to us. Our lungs, our eyes, the way that our body produces saliva, our skin, our blood vessels, everything, all of our body changes when we go into fight flight. And when we stay in that for a long time, it damages us. It damages us on a long-term level. So this is something that we talk about in a lot of our trainings. This is the resilient zone. So those blue lines represent the area in which I feel like I can cope with whatever happens during the day. So the line inside is like my experience of emotion during the day. So I might feel like annoyed or upset a little bit, but I'm still within my range of tolerance. Or I might go low and I might feel a little sad or a little down, but it's okay because I'm still within my range of tolerance. So when we experience trauma, then that lightning bolt of trauma comes into our life and we start bouncing outside of our resiliency zone. And when we bounce high outside the resiliency zone, we end up with high energy dysregulation, which is like edginess, irritability, mania, anxiety, panic, anger, or pain. So we're like high energy upsetness. Or we can get stuck low outside the resiliency zone, and then we end up with low energy dysregulation, like depression, sadness, isolation, exhaustion, fatigue, or numbness. And so we end up with this low energy upsetness. And sometimes we bounce back and forth, right? We're having anxiety attacks, we can't sleep, we're in pain, and then we're depressed and we can't get out of bed. And we don't feel like associating with anybody, you know, we're all isolated and numb. So, and it's like back and forth, we bounce back and forth outside of the resilience zone. And that's what happens when we experience trauma or the crushing stress of our modern world. So one of the things that our modern world has gotten wrong, the way that the medical system is set up, is that there's this idea that our physical body is separate from our emotional well-being, right? If I have something wrong with my physical body, then I go see a medical doctor, and if I have something wrong with my emotional health, then I go see a therapist, right? Like as if they're separate things, but they really aren't separate. They don't function separately at all. They function together completely as one entity. So when there's something wrong with my emotional health, that is something wrong in my body. And when there is something wrong in my body, that is the same thing as something being wrong with my emotional health. They are the same. And so this is a study that they did in the Netherlands, where they had people map the physical sensations of their emotions. When they were feeling something, what was the physical sensation that they were feeling? And so this is kind of what they came up with here. You can see like anxiety, you got like a lot of heat in the chest and stomach and up like neck area. You can see if you look at depression, right, there's like emptiness and coldness all through the body. And then you have the more positive emotions like love. Look at love is like all warm and toasty all through the upper part of the body. And you could compare that to anger. Anger is hot too, but it's like that yucky hot, right? Where you're like hot with anger. So when we experience our emotions, those are physical sensations that we experience in our body. And our emotional health is the same as our physical health. When our emotional health is not well, our physical health is also not well. Like they are functioning together as one. So what can we do about it? What can we do knowing that we live in a world that causes us this crushing stress that is damaging our bodies and our minds? Well, we can take care of ourselves. We can take care of each other. And we can take care of the small sphere of the world in which we have influence, and we can advocate for those who are more vulnerable than we are. So what does it mean to take care of yourself? Taking care of ourselves, self-care has almost become a buzzword. Sometimes people just throw self-care out there. Oh, you got to do your self-care. So sometimes when we use it that way, it like reduces the meaning. It makes it like, so it's almost a meaningless word. So I kind of want to focus on what is that? What does it mean when we talk about self-care? How do we care for ourselves? I believe that self-care has two branches. It has an indulgence branch and it has a discipline branch. So let's look at those. The indulgence branch is where you take care of yourself by treating yourself, by doing something kind to yourself, something that you really want to do, but you usually don't let yourself do, right? Bubble baths, chocolate cake, pedicures, vacations, allowing yourself to sleep in, allowing ourselves to indulge a little. Treat yourself. That's from a TV show called Parks and Rec that I find funny and amusing. So treat yourself. That's the idea of indulgence as self-care. The other branch of self-care is a lot less fun, but just as important as the other one. It's the discipline part of self-care. The discipline part of self-care is where you do things that maybe you don't want to do that you know are going to be better for you in the long run, right? So eating healthy, making sure you eat those vegetables, exercising, getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, going to therapy, practicing mindfulness. We're going to talk a little bit later about mindfulness, and taking your medications. Those are things that we do that are a discipline to take care of ourselves in the long term. And then spiritual self-care. What does spiritual self-care look like? It can look like Bible study and prayer. In many ways, Bible study and prayer function as a form of mindfulness. Mindfulness just means time when you can clear your mind and you can reflect and you can be quiet with yourself, or in the case of Bible study and prayer, quiet with God. And so Bible study and prayer are a form of mindfulness, and they are very healthy for us. So if you already have a habit of Bible study and prayer, give yourself a high five. You're already doing a form of self-care. Good job. Then spiritual readings, spiritual fellowship with one another, being out in nature and enjoying beauty. And then I had to throw a little advertisement in here. ATSS, I believe ATSS is a good form of spiritual self-care. So good job, everyone, for being here and taking care of yourselves. Yay. Self-care necessitates both indulgence and discipline. We cannot have self-care if we cut off one of those branches, right? We can't just only indulge ourselves and call that self-care. That's not going to be healthy for us in the long term. I can't eat chocolate cake for every meal and think that that's good for me, right? But I also can't do only the discipline part and cut off the indulgence part. I can't just only eat vegetables and only, make sure I get this and this and this, right? That discipline part. We have to have both branches. We have to be able to care for both sides of ourselves. And then the next part is taking care of each other. What does it mean to take care of each other? It's helpful for me to remember that saying, you've probably heard it, where we're all fighting a battle nobody else can see, right? So if I run into somebody on the street, I'm walking into Safeway and I see another person that I don't know. It's helpful for me to remember that person is struggling with something and I have no idea what it is, but they are trying their best and they are working hard. And it's helpful for me to reframe like that, because then if someone is rude to me, or if I'm in a bad mood and I snap at somebody or whatever, it helps me to remember I am struggling, but so are other people around me, strangers that I don't know, they're struggling too. This is a hard world that we live in, and we would all be better off if we learn to be kind and empathetic to one another, with the understanding that we are all under the same crushing stress. Treat one another as if we understand and acknowledge their battle, even if we don't know what it is. A little more kindness, a little more empathy, a little more patience, a little more forgiveness. And then taking care of the small sphere of the world in which you have influence. I think about this a lot. My job is to train people about trauma, to teach people about how to take care of our bodies, how to take care of children, how to take care of vulnerable people, how to take care of the homeless, how to take care of people with mental illnesses, how to be empathetic and compassionate and understanding to the people around us. And I hope that my work makes the world around me just a tiny bit better. And I challenge everyone, all of us should be doing that. All of us should be at all times trying to make the world around us just a little bit nicer, just a little bit better. So I want to ask you the question, how are you making the lives of the people around you better? And how are you making the world around you better? And then last, advocate for those who are more vulnerable than we are. There are some categories of people who suffer more under the crushing weight of societal stress than others. I don't want to get into politics because I know this can be a political issue, but really there is undisputably different groups of people in the world who suffer more under the stress of this current world than other people. So the first group that I thought of was people on the bottom of any type of business structure. I am a supervisor. I supervise 5 employees, and I take that as a really serious responsibility. It's my job to help protect those people as much as I can from the stress of the world around them, from the stress of the job that I am, facilitating them to do. And so I try to tell my employees that your home life, your life away from work, is your real life. Your work life is just your work life. So if you have to make a decision in which you prioritize either your home life or your work life, your home life should win every time, because that's your real life. That's the life you should take care of. And I try to support my people as much as I can. And in a way, I see that as a form of protest against a world that demands that we sacrifice our bodies and our families and our lives to our workplace, which is not okay. We should not have to do that. That should never be an expectation. Another group of people who suffer more than others are poor people. and disabled people and elderly people and LGBTQ people and immigrants and people who experience racial disparities and discrimination. Those are just a few of the groups of people who suffer more under the stress of the world than other types of people. And so it should also be our responsibility to advocate for those people, to make sure that I'm suffering, but those people are suffering more. So how can I make sure that I use my voice to help those people suffer a little bit less? And it's useful to remember, this is, I sometimes tell this when I'm talking to moms, because moms are some of the worst people at taking care of other people at the expense of themselves. But we want to put our own oxygen mask on first. We can't take care of other people until we take care of ourselves. If we are depleted, then we will be unable to care for other people. So the most important person to take care of first is ourselves. Then we care for the other people around us. So we can't care for anyone else until we are taken care of. Then we care for our family, then our community. And we want to be that light that is spoken of in the Bible, that light that shines with the kindness of the love of Jesus everywhere we go.